Good afternoon. Hello and welcome to the ALCTS webinar, Vendors, Administrators, and Patrons, oh my, Tailoring Communications to Different Audiences. This webinar is part 2 in the series Working with Continuing Resources, Advice and Examples from the Trenches. I'm Mary Reeder, a member of the ALCTS Continuing Education Committee, and I will be your host for today's webinar. Our presenter is Jennifer Williams, the Electronic Resources and Collection Development Librarian at Alabama A&M University in Huntsville, Alabama. A native of Huntsville, Jennifer has worked in both public services and technical services positions in both public and academic libraries, as well as a stint with Cersei Dynex. Her professional interests include methods of improving communication, the history and future of publishing, and the new digital landscape's effect on libraries. A few things to keep in mind for today's presentation. This webinar does not have interactive chat capabilities. If you wish to comment on today's presentation using Twitter, you may use the hashtag you see on the screen, hashtag ALCTSCE. We will not be monitoring the Twitter feed, however. If you have questions for Jennifer, please type them into the question box on your screen, and she'll answer them at the end of her presentation. Questions which remain unanswered while we're on the air will be answered offline, and the answers sent to all attendees. This webinar is being recorded, and you'll receive an email with links to the recording, the presentation slides, and an evaluation within 2 days. Please do take the time to fill out the evaluation form, since it will be used by the Continuing Education Committee to plan future events. There may be a slight delay as I turn the presentation over to Jennifer.
Good afternoon. Can everybody see my screen? I don't know why I asked that. You have no way of telling me if you can. Well, welcome. Thank you, Mary, for that introduction. And as she said, this is tailoring communications to different audiences, or tailoring technical services communications to different audiences, and part of the Continuing Resources webinar series from ALCTS. I am Jennifer Williams. I'm the Electronic Resources and Collection Development Librarian at Alabama A&M University. And as Mary said, I've worked in lots of different positions in lots of different kinds of departments and kinds of libraries and a vendor. So through all of those jobs, I've noticed a few things. And one of the things that I've noticed was that no matter where I worked, no matter what kind of workplace I was in, and no matter what department I was in, there was always some sort of communication problem. That may have been somebody who was not a good verbal communicator, somebody who was not good at sending out emails that made sense. We've all gotten, I'm sure, garbled messages from people that we work with. So the reason why I proposed this topic for a webinar, really there are 4 reasons. One was, as I said, everywhere that I've worked has had some sort of communication problem, and I figure if I'm seeing that everywhere I've been, then it's probably pretty widespread. There are probably other people that are seeing this problem as well. Another reason is that all workplaces, all professions, all departments have their own terminology, their own language, their own jargon that they use, and we're not always cognizant that we're using that jargon. I've gotten emails, just for example, from vendors using acronyms for their products, and I don't know what the acronym stands for, so I've had to write back and say, I'm sorry, I don't know what you're talking about. So it's little things like that that we need to be more cognizant of. Also, I've noticed, at least this is true for me and a lot of other people I've worked with, that tech services staff are often introverts. We, I think, gravitate to being sort of behind the scenes at the library because being around the public and having to interact with people is very wearing on us, very tiring. And that doesn't necessarily make us bad communicators, but it does sometimes make us reluctant communicators. So there's that. And then the 4th reason that I thought this might be a good topic for a webinar, and this is the most important, is because clear communication, the ability to communicate clearly, makes you more effective. The people who get what they want are getting what they want because they know how to communicate what they need, what they want, what they expect, and what they know. And the better you are at communicating those things, the more effective you'll be in your work and in your daily life. So that's why I wanted to do this topic for a webinar. So what we're going to learn today, I'm hoping that participants will come out of this feeling more confident in their communication skills, being able to recognize areas that they need to work on, and also areas that they're already good at, and also better able to determine the appropriateness of various communication styles depending on the setting. So that's what I want you all to be able to get out of this today. So in trying to figure out what I wanted to talk about, I started looking at the literature that was already out there on communication, and I very quickly became overwhelmed. There is so much to say about communication, good communication and bad communication in the workplace, and so much of it has already been said. There are hundreds, if not thousands, of experts out there. There are books that have been published. There are journals, entire journals on this. There are a million blogs to read. So what can I possibly say that would be useful that you couldn't get in a million other places? So in an attempt to focus my presentation and to make it useful, I've built the presentation around a scenario. And the scenario is that we have just run a successful trial of a database. Now I know that some of us, some of the people in the audience may be catalogers, maybe collection development, some of you may be electronic resources, but I think a database is a good example just to give us sort of a broad range of communication styles to look at and communication reasons, purposes to look at. So it's just an example. So the specific scenarios that you're going to see may seem like maybe they don't apply to your specific situations, but I'm going to cover 7 rules that the scenario is going to demonstrate, and those 7 rules should apply in all situations, no matter who you're talking to, who you're emailing, what the subject is, what the situation is. So that's what I'm going to use to focus is an example or a pretend successful trial of a database, and we're going to take it from the point of the trial has been successful and we're trying to get our director to fund a subscription, all the way through it's been set up and we have a patron asking for tech support, okay? And that's going to give us a framework to look at a variety of different kinds of communication. So before we actually start the scenario, I want to go over a few basics, just some sort of ABCs of communication so that we all are using the same terminology. The first thing I want to talk about is the audience. The audience is anyone who is receiving your communicated message, okay? It could be one person or it could be millions of people. And the audience is one thing that's going to dictate the medium and the formality of your message. And those are a couple of the next terms we're going to look at. So in addition to audience, it's important to think about your medium. Your medium is the format that the message is taking. It could be speech, it could be email, a poster, a text message, any way that you can think of that you can get a message from you to another person or persons, okay? The next thing that I want us to all have a clear definition of is direction. When we talk about direction in communication, communication is either going to be one-way or two-way. So this seems fairly obvious. For example, an email is a two-way communication. You can get a response and you're likely to read the response. A poster is a one-way communication. There are some sort of gray areas though. For example, what is a blog post? Is a blog post one-way or two-way? And in that case it would depend. on if the blogger engages commenters and encourages discussion and responds to those comments, or if the blogger ignores commenters or even disables comments. So something like that could be either one way or two way. The important thing to remember with direction is it's not whether a response is possible, but whether a response is heeded. So you could actually have a face-to-face conversation with somebody that is essentially one-way communication because the person is just not paying attention to what you say or is not listening. Right, so direction is important. And the last thing is formality. Formality, you're going to see a lot of different levels of formality in communications, and formality is dictated by two things. It's dictated by your audience and also by the medium that you're communicating in. An email is likely to be more formal than a text message, for example. A memo that's going to go out to the entire library system is going to be more formal than a memo that you send one or two coworkers. Okay, so your audience and the medium are going to define or determine your formality. So we're going to see some examples of this as we move forward. All right, so without further ado, let's take a look at our scenario. So I'm going to pretend that our library has just run a successful trial of Credo reference. And I have no particular reason for picking on Credo here. I'm not trying to pick on them, and I'm not trying to advertise them. They have an easy, clear logo, and to be honest, it was stretching my creative abilities a bit much to try to come up with my own imaginary database and create a logo for it. I just couldn't make that happen. So we're going to pretend Credo. So we've had a successful trial, and we want to purchase a subscription, so we want to talk our library director into funding that. All right. Before I go on, though, I want to say one thing that I had actually planned on saying at a later point in the presentation, but I think it's important to have it in our minds. Technical services librarians and library staff are in a unique position. In technical services, we get to be translators. We're translators between lots of different internal and external forces that all speak different languages and use different terminology. So we want to keep our communications clear, and we want to be able to use the correct jargon and the correct language depending on who we're talking to. And we will. That is one of the rules that I'll mention in a little bit. But I wanted to say that before I show you my first email example. So this is an email that I might send, that somebody might send to a library director. So as you can see, this goes on for 10 sentences, or 10 lines. And it starts with, we just ran a trial of Credo reference that got more use and more positive feedback than any other trial we've ever run. It was really successful, exclamation point, emoticon. Mr. Smith said that he would use it in all his classes, and one of our regulars, Ms. Johnson, said her kids would use it for their homework assignments. I think it would really get a lot of use. The company that makes it wants X amount of money for it, but we can probably get a better deal than that if you want me to try to negotiate with them. The usage was really high too, like 45 uses in a month, which is unheard of for a trial. They don't usually get any use at all. Should I contact the vendor and try to negotiate or not? That is long-winded, and it buries the lead. This email is causing a lot of extra work for my library director. And it's not so much that I care that my library director is getting a lot of extra work, which I do, but that's not the important part. The important part is that if you want something from someone, you want to make it as easy as possible for them to give it to you. Okay? So we want to cut down the amount of work that our library director has to go through to get the important parts of this message. All right? So that brings us to the first rule. Thomas Jefferson said the most valuable of all talents is that of never using two words when one will do. So our long-winded email needs to be cut down. We need to be concise. Rule number 1 is be concise. All right, so let's take another look at that email, and I'm going to highlight the important bits, the parts that we want to really put at the very beginning of the email. It got more use and more positive feedback than any trial we've ever run. The company wants a certain price, and does the library director want me to contact the vendor and try to go ahead with this? That's all that really needs to be said. And rule number 2 applies here too. It's know your audience. So be concise and know your audience. In this case, our audience is a library director. Now, depending on your library and your position, this might be your library director, it might be a department head, it might be a board member, whoever it is that holds the purse strings and makes these determinations about the budget. Whoever it is, if they're in the position of being the decider, the person that makes these calls, they're likely very busy. So my audience for this is a busy director who probably doesn't have time to read her email very thoroughly and who really just wants the pertinent parts of my message and who has power to make a decision that I want her to make in my favor. Okay, that's my audience. So with that, here's my rewrite of that email. We're down now to 5 lines instead of 10, so we've halved it, and it's only 2 sentences. Dear Dr. Jones, my pretend library director, due to the overwhelmingly positive response to our recent trial of Credo reference, I recommend that we pursue a subscription at whatever a year as quoted by the vendor. Would you like me to contact them for a license agreement? That's it. It's concise. It's respectful. It has a level of formality that is appropriate to a director or a decider. And it gives the pertinent information right up front. We had an overwhelmingly positive response. I recommend that we pursue a subscription, and would you like me to contact them? And that last bit is very important. It is a yes or no question. So my director could potentially respond to this with a single word, and I would know what I was supposed to do. And I say that because I've had the experience. I had a boss once who, if I asked her a question that was an either-or question, would you like me to do this or that? Invariably, she would give me a yes or a no as the answer, which told me that she really wasn't reading my question very carefully. But also, I learned over the years that I worked for her that if I wanted a clear answer from her, I needed to ask a yes or no question, because that's what she was going to give me, was a yes or no. So either or questions are more complicated, and you want to make it as easy as you can for the person that you're contacting. And we've been talking about this in terms of contacting a library director or a department head, but this really goes for anybody. Anybody that you're contacting them because you want them to do something. Okay, you're having a communication situation, be it verbal or written, whatever, because you want somebody to do something, either something for you or something that you think will be helpful to the patron, but you want them to do something. You want them to take some sort of action. And if you want them to take the action, you need to make it as easy for them as you can for them to do the action, to take the action that you want. All right, so let's just say that my boss sent me back this as a response. I'm sure we have all seen these messages, poorly written, poorly spelled, poorly punctuated, and that say sent from my iPhone at the bottom or sent from my Android tablet or whatever. So In this case, she's told me, proceed as you see, but in court for 2-year price break. Now, 2 things are possible here. One, I have no idea what she's saying, in which case I need to write a quick response and ask for some clarification. And you can do that politely. You can do that in a single sentence. I'm sorry, I don't understand what you mean by whatever word is confusing or whatever part is confusing. Could you please clarify? Or if you know your boss, or you know the person who is emailing you, chances are you can cipher this yourself. I'm guessing that it's supposed to say, proceed as you see fit, but inquire for a 2-year price break. In other words, see if we can get a 2-year subscription instead of a 1-year subscription, and keep them from raising the price on us in the 2nd year. So that's what I would go forward with. But as I said, if you get something like this that you really just can't parse out, it's okay to ask for clarification. And I'd like to say here too, if you are in the position of being the decider, or really anybody who's responding to an email, who has a tendency to do it from their iPhone or respond in a hurry, keep in mind that these kind of responses, one, are cryptic and make people's jobs a little bit more difficult because they have to figure out what it means, and 2, it really gives a bad impression. A lot of people, their first response when they see something like this is going to be, how did this person get to be library director if this is the best they can communicate? And we shouldn't think that. We should give the benefit of the doubt and say, okay, she's sending it from her iPhone. She's probably in a meeting. She probably doesn't have time to spell check, or she's typing on a tiny keyboard or something like that. And at least she took the time to respond quickly and be appreciative of that. But that doesn't tend to be how we look at things. We tend to look at things as, ugh, this person doesn't know how to spell and they don't know how to talk clearly, and I get this kind of stuff all the time from them, and how did they ever become a library director? So to avoid that kind of bad feeling, unless there's a deadline hanging over you, it's probably best to wait until you have a couple of minutes to sit down and answer an email with a regular keyboard where you're not having to divide your attention and work with your thumbs and all of that, and come out with a better response that makes more sense and is clearer. Because these, this webinar is geared towards people who are working in tech services, which maybe I'm making the wrong assumption, but I tend to think of that as those of us who are sort of lower on the totem pole, like myself. But these rules apply no matter where you are on that totem pole. So clarity is still important. Conciseness is still important. All right, so I digress. So Wittgenstein says everything that can be said clearly. And of course, the email that we just saw was not clear. And as I said, take a moment and do a better job of getting clarity. Because rule number 3 is to be clear. So far we've got be concise, we've got know your audience, and we've got be clear. Because clarity is your message. Clarity is essential to your message. If you're not clear, then people don't know what you're talking about. We have all met that person who rambles, right? We've all met that person who talks a mile a minute and they're a delight to be around, but you come away from them with only half an idea of what they were trying to tell you. We've probably all worked with them. Those people are not being clear. They're also not being concise, but they're not being clear. So if you are one of those people, take a minute to collect your thoughts before you have to speak. Take a minute to think about what you're typing and double check your email if you're sending an email. because clarity is, as I said when I was outlining the reasons for doing this webinar, clarity is what's going to make your message have impact. It's going to make your message more effective. All right, so the next step is going to, in our scenario, is going to be talking to the vendor. And for some of us, especially those of us who are new to technical services, talking to vendors can be a little intimidating, a little scary. It gets easier as you go on. It really does. But if you're new with this, or if it hasn't gotten easier yet, you shouldn't think of vendors as intimidating. Vendors are just people like you and me. In fact, they're in a very similar situation to us. Most of the time, the librarian or the staff member who's talking to the vendor is not the decider. I've used that term before. It's not a very professional sounding term, but it is what it is. It's a decider, the person who's going to make the decision about whether you purchase that database, whether you subscribe to that journal, whether you get a new software program, whatever that's going to help your staff do their work. They're the decider. The people who are the people in the library who are talking to the vendors are probably not the deciders. The vendor reps that we're talking to are probably not the deciders on their end either. So we're both middlemen. So you are a middleman talking to a middleman. So everything that you decide between you has to be passed on to another level above you. And all we want is a good price and a good license agreement. And all the rep wants is a sale and a positive relationship, working relationship going forward, which actually is something we want too, a positive relationship going forward. So really, you and the rep are on the same side in a lot of ways, okay? You can make friends with your vendor reps. You can be on a first-name basis with them. You can ask them about their kids and about their pets and things. Be friendly with them. Just remember that in the end, you're on team library and they're on team profit, okay? So in writing to a vendor, so this is my fake vendor from Credo here, that I've given him a little fake name that those of you who are of a certain age will recognize. And my email to him is a response to his email from earlier during our trial. He wrote, "Hi Jennifer, I see that your trial is getting a lot of usage. Have you received any feedback? I'd be happy to send you any additional information. Sincerely, Mike." Well, his email address is michael@credo.com, and he's signed himself Mike. So I have two options in writing to him. I can be very formal and say, "Dear Michael," or "Dear Mr. Stipe, thank you for your kind email, blah, blah, blah," and be very formal. Or I can mirror him and say, "Hi, Mike." He called me Jennifer. He said, "Hi, Jennifer," instead of "Dear Jennifer." And he signed his name Mike. So I'm going to say, "Hi, Mike." And then I'm going to have a little bit of sort of informal banter at the beginning of the email. "You were right. The trial has gone really well. I can't believe we got so much feedback!" Exclamation point. An exclamation point, I read out an exclamation point, excuse me, in an email earlier to the library director, and I read it out loud, but I didn't say, that's a very informal punctuation mark. So if you're writing a formal email, if you're trying to make your message more formal, you don't want to use exclamation points. In this case, we're trying to be a little bit informal. We're trying to be have more camaraderie. So an exclamation point is okay. But then, after a very brief, camaraderie, relaxed kind of line, I'm going to get right down to business. We're definitely interested in pursuing a subscription to Credo Reference. You quoted us blank for a year. We would like to get a 2-year subscription at blank per year for a total of blank. I'm very clear about what my library needs in order to go ahead with the subscription. I'm not beating around the bush. There's no banter in this part. I I got the banter out of the way, and then I was very clear and to the point. Okay? So you don't want to give up your negotiating power, but part of that negotiating power is that mirroring creates rapport, which is rule number 4. So when you mirror someone, they sign their name Mike, you call them Mike. They say hi, you say hi. That creates rapport with them. And that's true in any situation. In fact, the opposite is true as well. If somebody writes to you and says, hi, Gladys, how are you doing? And is very informal in their email, and then you write back, dear Mr. Smith, thank you for your communication of 2 days ago. That has the effect of putting them in their place. And usually, when you're writing a business communication, when you're communicating with people that you work with, you don't want to put somebody in their place, unless you just really don't like them. But your real purpose, generally speaking, is to put people at ease. So let the other person take the lead on the level of formality and mirror them. And this is in writing or verbally. Mirroring their level of formality will make them more comfortable. It will make them more comfortable with you specifically, and it'll make them more likely to want to do what you want them to do. Okay? All right, so let's pretend that we have successfully talked our director into subscribing to this database, and we've talked the vendor into giving us a good deal, and we've set up the database on the website, and we've added MARC records for their books into our catalog, and we are ready to go. So what do we need to do next? We need to make sure that the public services librarians know what to do with this and that we have it, and also that the patrons know that it's there and how useful it is for them. So I'm going to go off my PowerPoint or off my slides for just a second and show you, sorry, here we go. This is Credo References support page, where you find out about Credo Online Reference Service, which we just call Credo Reference. And you can see they have some printable tips and tricks. They've got some marketing materials. They've got a lot of videos, and you can sign up for training. And one of the things that they have in marketing materials is these absolutely wonderful posters, which I will talk about in just a minute. But the printable tips and tricks, there are all kinds of them. You can just scroll through here and see lots and lots of good stuff, all kinds of PDFs, and some websites that they can take you to, also some wonderful videos and media. Now, as I said, I'm not here to talk about Credo Reference. It's just incidental that I'm using them as an example. Any database, any new product that you get, whether it's forward-facing or back-facing, like software that is useful for the staff, or a database that, or some sort of online platform for the patrons, is going to have some sort of site like this that has all kinds of training materials, tips and tricks. Sometimes they've created libguides that you can go to learn more about how to use them. And it's very tempting just to grab this link and throw it into an email and say, hey, public services, here you go. We got this today. But it's not good practice to do that. Go back to my slides here. Instead, what you want to do, again, this goes back to making your coworkers' jobs easy because you want them to do something, okay? You want this database that you've done all the work to set up the trial, you've communicated with vendors, you've communicated with the library, with the budgetary people, you've set everything up, now you want it to be used, okay? Because if it's not used, then all of that work that you put into it is for nothing. And if you want it to be used, you need to get the public services people to push it, and you need to get them excited about it. So what you want from them in this point, in this instance, is that you want them to be excited about the database. So if you just send them a link to their marketing website and say, hey, there's all kinds of marketing materials here, have at it, that doesn't really help them. And I will say this from the point of view of, I used to work public services. If I had gotten an email like that, and I did get many emails like that, I would flag it in my email inbox, and I would say, oh, wow, this is really great stuff. There's a lot here that I need to take in. I'd better look at this later when I have time. But then I'd never get time, and I'd kind of put it off and put it off until I just forgot about it. And then I'd think, oh, well, I can figure it out on my own the next time I'm with a student who's using it. And that's not what you want them to do, okay? We're all short of time. But if you can take the time to write sort of a summary of what's on their marketing page, maybe take one of those videos or one of those PDFs and attach it, then you've done part of the work for them, and they'll at least see that one that you attached, and they'll at least watch that one video that you linked. They might not look at anything else on that marketing page, but they'll at least have seen some of it. All right? So my imaginary email for my scenario here, I've said, colleagues, I'm happy to announce the acquisition of a new database for our library. Our recent trial of Credo reference was very successful, so we've added a subscription. You will see the link on our database page, and the reference titles have been added to our OPAC. Now, I will say, I'm using jargon here, which I haven't gotten to that rule. One of the rules is avoid jargon. We'll see that in just a minute. But I've used jargon here, but that's because this is an internal communication, and I know that everybody that this is aimed at, the public services staff, know what an OPAC is. All right? So it's okay to use jargon if you are careful to use it only with people who are going to understand it. And remember that it's not just the library profession as a whole that has jargon. The tech services department sometimes has their own jargon as well. For example, I feel fairly sure that some of the public services librarians I work with would not know what I was talking about if I said something about the link in the 856 field in a MARC record. They just wouldn't know what an 856 field was. So just be cognizant, again, know your audience, and that will tell you when it's okay and when it's not okay to use these jargony words and terminology. Then I've said attached you will find a copy of the poster that we will be placing around the library to advertise and a printable brochure that provides a good basic overview. So I've given them a poster so that when they start seeing it around the library, they won't be surprised and they won't be confused by it. And also a short printable brochure that I got from Credo's marketing page that has an overview. So at least they'll have seen that. All right? And then I say, in addition, Credo's marketing page, and it has our marketing website, excuse me, and it's linked. So they can go to the marketing website and see what else is there if they want and if they have time, that at least they've gotten that little bit. So I've sort of done part of their job for them to make things easier for them, okay? And that makes it more likely that they will be interested and excited about this new resource and will be able and willing to share it with their patrons. All right, and that brings me to rule number 5. I mentioned the sign that we were going to put up around the library. People won't read, and corollary to that, people won't see signs. I'm sure you all know this from experience. I used to work in a library where I was in public services, and we had a 12-foot long public services, circulation desk. And almost every inch of that circulation desk was covered in 8x10 signs in acrylic holders. And what would happen was the students, it was an academic library, the students would come in and they'd kind of look at all the signs and their eyes would glaze over and they'd look at me and ask their question, even though the sign that answered the question they were asking might be right in front of me, right in between me and them, facing them. They could look, if they just looked down, they would see the sign. They would have their answer. All of those signs were so overwhelming that they just, what went through their head was, I don't have time to look at all these signs. I'm just going to ask this nice lady behind the desk. So people don't see signs, and people don't read. So you want to keep this email that we send. Can you hear me now? Hello? You can hear me? Okay, Eva can't hear me. I'm sorry, everyone. I was just told that I was not audible. All right, I've got my microphone turned all the way up, so I'm hoping that that'll fix it. Sorry. Okay. Please let me know if you're still having trouble. Okay, great. Sorry about that, folks. You want to keep your emails short. You want to keep signage. Wording should be to a minimum. Any communication that goes out, especially to patrons, you want to keep words to a minimum. And one of the things that I wanted to show you was in the marketing materials for Credo Reference. You see how most of their signs actually have very little text on them. I especially love this one of the man climbing a mountain of research. That is very effective imagery. It's an old adage, everyone knows it, a picture is worth 1,000 words, but it's absolutely true. They could just as easily have made this poster say, Credo Reference will help you climb a mountain of research, but nobody would read it and it wouldn't be nearly as effective. Okay, so if you're very lucky, your vendors will provide you wonderful posters like this. Not all vendors provide posters, and some provide posters that really aren't that effective. So if that happens to you, there are some wonderful, wonderful places that you can get copyright-free images and build your own image-heavy, visually appealing, grabbing kind of graphic poster. Just remember to keep the words to a minimum. A lot of times we feel like we have to explain everything on a poster because if we don't explain it, how's the patron going to know? But that's what we're here for. So if the patron sees an eye-catching poster, then they're going to go, ooh, hey, what's that? And they're going to ask us. Whereas if the patron sees a poster with a paragraph of text on it, it's not going to catch their eye, and if it does, they're going to think, ugh, that's a lot of text to read, and they're going to skip it. Okay? So, hold on one second. I just realized. Okay. Sorry about that. All right, so the places that I go to get copyright-free images, the two main places, because I think they have much more interesting images, are Pixabay and Morguefile. Pixabay, you just have to be careful because some of the images on there are copyrighted, sorry, are from Shutterfly or Shutterstock, which makes you pay for them. So they kind of trick you. They put the ones that you have to pay for at the very, very top of your search results, but then it's just one line of ones you have to pay for, and then you scroll down and you can see all the ones that are free and copyright free, not just price free. Morguefile sounds kind of depressing, but it's morgue as in newspaper morgue. It's a newspaper morgue is where they put all of the archived copies and all the archived images that they've used in the newspapers. So Morguefile is just that's what they're named after. It's like the newspaper morgue. So Mordfile, they have something similar. They have, you can click here to see ones that you have to pay for, but the main section of search results are copyright free and free price wise. Wikimedia Commons it's Wikipedia, but it's the media side of Wikipedia. And to get public domain copyright free images, when you're searching, just put the letters PD for public domain before your search terms, and then all of your search results will be in the public domain. And then the last site that I use is Creative Commons. It's search.creativecommons.org. The only problem with Creative Commons is that there's no guarantee that the images will actually be copyright free. Most of what they have is under a Creative Commons license, and most of them require attribution. So, which is fine, you just have to have somewhere on your poster or somewhere on whatever your slides or whatever it is that you're creating would have to say image by so-and-so on such and such site. And Creative Commons searches Google Images, Flickr, Pixabay, and several other sites as well. So those are wonderful ways to create a copyright-free, a visual, eye-catching poster without having to pay copyright, and in the case that your vendor just didn't do what you needed them to do. All right, I'm being told to speed up, and that's okay. I think I'm fairly close to the end because a lot of these last slides are overview, so I will speed up. Okay, so posters obviously are not the only way that we communicate with our patrons. If your library has an Instagram account, a Facebook account, a Twitter account, any kind of text messaging software where you can send out a mass text message, obviously you want to use that. And again, all of those are going to be minimal words and maximum visual, except for text messaging. It's minimal words, but not so much maximum visuals. But the others, you want to have some sort of image. As I said before, I think of us in technical services as translators. In that we are talking to different groups and making these different groups understand each other. In my very first job out of library school, I was hired in to a public library. I was in the reference department, and my title was Digital Collections Librarian, but the job description was Electronic Resources Librarian. It was before Sarah Hutton's competencies came out, and they just weren't really sure what to call the position. And one of the things that they wanted me to do was to act literally as a translator between the reference department and the IT department or systems department, because the systems librarian at that time was very obtuse. She spoke as if she was speaking to computer engineers. Everything that she said was very, very high tech, and they just didn't understand what she was asking of them, and she didn't understand why they didn't understand. So that was kind of my first introduction to there really are very different languages being used in different departments in the same library, and we don't always understand each other. So I keep skipping to this slide before I mean to, but that's okay. Going back to our scenario, the end of our scenario, let's pretend that Credo reference is up and it's being used by our patrons, and one of our patrons hops on our chat reference service and asks the reference librarian for help because she's having trouble getting into Credo reference from her home computer. Okay? Now, those of us in tech services know that the reason for that is going to have something to do with the proxy server. Maybe the link she's following doesn't have the proxy prefix or infix in it. Maybe there's some other problem with the link. Maybe there's some problem with the way the proxy server is set up. But whatever it is, the priority here is to get that patron on the site. We can figure out what the problem is with the link later and take care of that internally. But the first thing has to be the Band-Aid. So we can do the surgery and make sure all the links are working, and that's like a huge job after the fact. But right now, we just need to put a Band-Aid on the patron and make sure they can get their off-campus, off-site access. I'm academic, so I say off-campus, right now. So the Band-Aid here is going to be to tell the reference librarian what to tell the patron. Now, we could say, you need to tell the patron that the proxy server is not working and that she needs to change the format of her URL. But the patron's not going to understand that. In fact, the reference librarian might not understand that. That's jargon, and we want to avoid jargon. And I've already said that once before, but that is rule number 6, avoid jargon. That jargon is specific to tech services, not just to libraries. So it's possible your public services librarians wouldn't even know what you're talking about. So what you want to do instead is send the correct link with the proxy server or proxy prefix to the reference librarian and tell the reference librarian, give the patron this link, tell them that a librarian is working on fixing the problem, or the staff is working on fixing the problem, and in the meantime she can use this link with no trouble. That's all the patron needs to know. Here's a link that works, and that will solve their problem for them. After that, you can be as techy as you want in trying to figure out how to fix the problem. Maybe you need to talk to the cataloging department to fix the 856 fields. Maybe there was a problem with the proxy server and you need to talk to IT. Maybe it's something you can fix yourself. But at this point, when you're talking to these internal departments who all understand the technical issues, this is where it's okay to be jargony and to speak the language. Okay? So a quick recap, and then I will take questions. The rules. Rule number 1, be concise. Rule number 2, know your audience. It could be 1 person, it could be 1,000 people, but know your audience. Rule number 3, be clear. Clarity is what is going to make you effective. Rule number 4, mirroring creates rapport. Mirror the people you are talking to. Let them set the pace as far as formality and style of communication. Rule number 5, people won't read, and people won't read signs. Rule number 6, avoid jargon. And I threw in an extra rule, rule number 7, and that's know thyself. And when I say know thyself, what I mean is, 1, know your own strengths and weaknesses. If there's something you're really good at, make that your thing. If there's something that you have trouble with, see if maybe there's somebody else in your department that's good at it that could help you learn. Also, know your department. Know thyself as in know your workplace. If there's somebody else in your department who's really good at creating graphic posters, but maybe they're not so good at something you're good at, maybe you can, maybe they can be the one that does the posters and you can be the one that writes the sort of tech manuals that explain how to do things step by step. Everybody has something that they're good at. Find out what those are. Find out what your department members' strengths are. Play up each other's strengths and help each other learn. And now I will take questions and comments if anybody has any.
If anybody has any questions, you can type them into the questions box. I have one for you, Jennifer.
Yeah.
Do you have any tips on communicating, shall we say, respectfully with a superior who has a bad habit of sending those short little gibberish emails from their iPhone?
Yes, I do, from experience. One, I would really recommend, if you can figure it out without asking and you're confident that you know what they're actually saying, then just don't even bother with asking. But if you do need to ask, if you need to ask for clarification, keep it short, very short. Be apologetic. Say something to the effect of, dear Dr. So-and-so, I'm sorry, I did not understand, I don't understand this particular phrase from your email. Could you please clarify? Please, being the operative word there. But yeah, keep it short, keep it to the point, and be polite. Right. And don't show it to everybody that you work with and go, oh my gosh, I can't believe the email I got, you know.
Good point.
Yeah. So they probably have all gotten them too.
Okay.
Any other questions?
I am not seeing any in the question box.
Okay.
Anybody out there? All right. Well, then let's wrap things up.
Yes. So my contact information is jennifer.williams@aamu.edu if anybody wants to contact me with questions later. That's how you would reach me. I hope that you found this useful, that you're taking away something that you can put into practice in the workplace. And I thank you all for attending.
Okay, I'm going to switch the presenter back to out of it, and thank you to all of our attendees today. We hope you found today's session useful. Soon you'll receive a short online evaluation form. Please take a few minutes to respond to the questions and return the form to us. Your comments are very valuable and help the ALCTS CE Committee plan new continuing education offerings. Information about all ALCTS continuing education opportunities can be found on the ALCTS homepage at the URL on the screen. Upcoming webinars include parts 3 through 6 of this series, Working with Continuing Resources, and sessions on Mark XML, an ALCTS 101 session for those of you who might be new to ALCTS. Using LibGuides and technical services is also coming up. Suggestions for webinars and other continuing education opportunities are welcome at any time. Please contact me at mary.reader@marquette.edu or submit a proposal for a webinar using the form at the URL listed on the screen. I'd like to thank Eva Sorrell and Kat Balick for providing technical support for today's webinar. The support they and their colleagues on the Technical Support Subcommittee provide make it possible for us to present these webinars smoothly. I would also like to recognize Heather Staines, representing CRS's Education, Research, and Publications Coordinating Committee, which helped organize this series by helping to select topics and finding presenters for it. Thank you for joining us today, and we hope you'll participate in other ALCTS continuing education offerings again in the future. Have a great day.